Hey up everyone, today we have another epic. I'm going to look at the big players in the motorcycle industry and how the big Japanese manufacturers sit today in the changing world of motorcycle sales. Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki and Kawasaki as the big four have been seen as the dominant force in the motorcycle industry for a long time now, but it wasn't always like that. And to start, I will look at the changing face of the industry and who the big players have been over time. This historical context will show you that despite what you might think, the dominance of the big four has fluctuated a lot since they began to flood the markets in the 70s and 80s. They may once have been the biggest four motorcycle manufacturers on the planet, but are they still today? Do they still hold the biggest influence globally? After that, I will look more closely at both global and UK sales in the last year or two to try and understand better where we are heading and what the future holds for the industry we all love so much. A quick reminder, if I may, try and remember to like the video if you enjoy it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Sharing the video any way you think people will be interested helps us a lot too. I'll explain how you can help support the channel more later, but for now, let's dive in to see who really are the big four now. I will put a link to the video of the changing tide of motorcycle sales in the description, which goes back much further, but here I will begin in 1970, just as the Japanese were growing. Back then it was actually Royal Enfield who had the biggest overall cumulative revenue, partly because they'd been going so long, and partly because of the vast market in India where they traded independently. Second biggest was Harley-Davidson, and the difference was quite small really. Kawasaki had initially taken a big chunk of the market and sat in third, but it may surprise you that their future partner Bajaj was sitting comfortably as the fourth most profitable motorcycle manufacturer in the world even then. Piaggio sat in fifth because of their massive scooter sales network and their deal with Bajaj in India, but that was soon to end. Suzuki came in sixth, just ahead of Honda in seventh and Yamaha in eighth. BMW and then Ducati rounded out the top 10, and I find it interesting to see that even back in the 70s, you could say that Bajaj are one of the most influential manufacturers in the industry. By 1975, Bajaj had grown to become the second most profitable brand behind Royal Enfield, with Harley-Davidson dropping into third place and Honda climbing to fourth. Yamaha were in fifth now, and Kawasaki had been pushed down to seventh, with Ducati rising to a surprising sixth most profitable motorcycle company, with the top 10 finished off by BMW, Piaggio and Suzuki. By 1980, although Royal Enfield sat at the top, this was almost solely based on the sales through the 50s and 60s. On the success of the 900SS, Panther and Dharma, Ducati had risen to become the second most profitable brand by the end of that year. Bajaj were in third and Yamaha fourth, with Harley back in fifth, Honda in sixth and Kawasaki seventh. There were no changes at the bottom, with BMW, Piaggio and Suzuki finishing off the top 10 again. It may surprise you that even in 1985, with a fairly minor market outside of India, Royal Enfield were not only still at the top of the table, but were now extending their lead when it came to profitability. They still sat at the top, but Harley had climbed back up to second on the table. Ducati rounded out the podium in third, followed by Honda, who had jumped up to fourth, and Yamaha fifth. BMW moved up to sixth on the table, with Kawasaki seventh, Piaggio down to eighth, and Bajaj ninth, with Suzuki at the bottom in 10th again. By 1990, Honda's continued growth had finally taken them to the top spot as the most profitable motorcycle company ever, finally passing Royal Enfield's cumulative sales, which had slowed down dramatically. Hero, buoyed by their partnership with Honda, were now in second, with Enfield pushed back into third. Yamaha were fourth, and a newly relaunched Triumph brand jumped up into fifth. Kawasaki was sixth, and Ducati had dropped down to seventh. Harley were down to 8th, Bajaj 9th, and Suzuki was still in 10th. The re-entry of Triumph pushed Piaggio out of the top 10 and did shake the market up, but by 1995 there were even more changes. Yamaha wanted to be number 1, and a push through the early 90s meant that they took the number 1 slot. That pushed Honda down to 2nd and Hero down to 3rd. Kawasaki were 4th and Triumph 5th, and these 5 were all well ahead of the rest. Bajaj, Royal Enfield, Suzuki, Harley-Davidson and Piaggio finished off the top 10, all with very similar cumulative profits, as you can see in the slide. The top 5 remained the same up until 2000, with Yamaha, Honda, Hero, Kawasaki and Triumph still significantly ahead of the rest. Bajaj were closing in 6th, and Suzuki were up to 7th. Then came Piaggio, and then BMW came back in 9th, with Harley-Davidson close behind, pushing Royal Enfield out of the top 10 after many years at the top. Finally, in 2005, we saw what we call the Big Four at the top together. Yamaha was still just ahead of Honda, with Kawasaki 3rd and Suzuki up in 4th. It had taken over 30 years of dedication and determination, but the Japanese were well and truly established at the top at this point. Hero were the closest in 5th, with Triumph losing ground on the leaders in 6th. Bajaj, Harley-Davidson and BMW were all close behind, and although Piaggio hung on to their top 10 spot, they were falling behind. By 2010, Honda were back at the top, with a significant lead over Yamaha in 2nd and Kawasaki 3rd, but Hero were back in the top 4, ahead of a resurgent Harley-Davidson in 5th, and Suzuki were the big losers, being pushed down to 6th. Bajaj, Triumph, BMW and Piaggio finished off the top 10 this time. 2015 saw Honda extending their lead, and only Yamaha could keep pace with them in 2nd. Harley followed in 3rd and Hero still in 4th, but now it was Bajaj up to 5th. Triumph was 6th, ahead of Kawasaki and BMW, with Suzuki down to 9th place, ahead of a new face in the top 10. KTM had finally entered the big league. 2020 saw no changes at the top, with Honda leading Yamaha, followed by Harley and Hero. Kawasaki and Suzuki were 5th and 6th, followed by Bajaj and BMW. TVS had pushed their way into 9th, and the big orange machine was still in 10th. Bearing in mind these are cumulative figures, by 2024, before the announcement of the debt pile at KTM, the big orange machine was still showing at the bottom of the top 10 in all-time profits, but we know now that wasn't really reality. Honda and Yamaha were still way ahead at the top. Hero were 3rd, but now Bajaj were up to 4th. Harley were in 5th, slightly ahead of Kawasaki, with Suzuki in 7th and BMW 8th. TVS and KTM sat at the bottom of the top 10, but this is where I will start looking at the yearly sales figures rather than the cumulative profit. This yearly analysis will help us see where the industry is now rather than looking at the historical figures. In 2024, global sales meant that Honda was still the undisputed leader. They sold 19.4 million units, showing a 6% increase on the previous year. Hero Motorcore were in 2nd spot with 5.9 million sales, up 6.9%, and Yamaha were in 3rd place with 4.6 million units sold. That was up 4.2%. In 4th, we got Yadea, the big Chinese manufacturer specialising in electric vehicles. Yadea experienced a slight decrease in sales, but still sold 4.3 million units. That was down 13% on the previous year. TVS came in 5th with 3.7 million units sold, up 12.6%, and Bajaj were in 6th place with 3.1 million sales, up 9.3%. Suzuki held on to 7th place with 2 million units sold, up 6%, and Mexican giant Italica broke into the top 10 with 1.3 million units sold, showing a significant increase of 35.8%. Zongshan occupied the 9th spot with 1 million units sold, up 3.4%, and Royal Enfield finished off the top 10 with 948,000 units sold, up 5.1%. Profitability is a complex issue, especially when you have a company structures that are so intertwined. Vosges may make a loss, but that would just change the overall profitability of the Longines Group. Norton have made massive losses, but that is on the investment that TVS has put into the company, building new factories and investing in the production of a whole new range. I do have some, but not all of the profitability figures, and they can be misleading, especially with anomalies like the overstocking and pre-registering of non-Euro 5 Plus bikes in December 2024. This increased the sales figures massively for that month, which inflated the year's figures, but it has had the effect of flooding the market, and so dealers have been discounting to try and get rid of the overstock. The brands I do have figures for profit for in 2024 are as follows. Ducati reported a revenue of over €1 billion, or $1.16 billion, for the third consecutive year. That gave them an operating profit of €91 million, or $106 million. That equates to a 9.1% profitability rate. While revenue was slightly down from 2023's record, it demonstrated continued strong performance. Harley-Davidson delivered diluted earnings per share of $3.44 and an operating income of $278 million, with an operating margin of 6.7%. But global motorcycle shipments were down 17%, and the company's Q4, unlike with the European brands, saw a significant revenue decline and some serious operational losses. Despite this, Harley-Davidson Financial Services segment saw an increased income, but then Moco decided to sell part of that off. Dealer inventory levels have decreased though, which is positive. Yamaha hit an all-time record high for revenue in 2024, but experienced a drop in operating income for the first time in 4 years. That was blamed on increased costs and adverse market conditions in certain sectors. Revenue was 2,576 billion yen, or around $17 billion, an increase of over 161.4 billion yen, equivalent to $1 billion, up 6.7% compared to the previous year. For 2025, Yamaha are looking to increase that net income, with revenue expected to reach 2.7 trillion yen, which equates to $18.25 billion. Kawasaki Heavy Industries, who don't feature in the top 10, also reported a record business profit of 143.1 billion yen, or $968 million for 2024, and anticipate even higher profits for 2025. But you can see from that comparison how much of a small player they have now become. Yamaha generates 18 times the profit of Kawasaki when it comes to motorcycles. In summary, while brands like Ducati and Kawasaki demonstrated strong profitability and growth in certain areas, the overall motorcycle industry faced many challenges in 2024. Many companies experienced both declining sales and profits. However, with many new manufacturers entering the global market, this was all but inevitable among the more established brands, as their market share was watered down among the other new brands. If we combine the EU and UK market, it grew by 1.3%, but the UK was the worst performing of the 5 big European markets, with a 4% drop in overall sales. Italy and Spain saw the biggest growth, with Italy's sales increasing 5.3% and Spanish sales up 6.1%. while Germany saw a 2.7% drop in sales and France also a 2.2% drop. The biggest drop of all was in the sale of electric bikes, which just didn't take off anywhere except France. France saw the market grow by 2%, but that's only when measured against the 2023 drop of almost 15%. So it was still 13% down on the 2022 figures. Germany's electric bike sales were down a massive 46%, and in Italy they were down 30%, and Spain down 25%. So to all intents and purposes, the electric motorcycle market in Europe looks all but dead now. Looking at global motorcycle sales for 2025, in the first quarter we got the highest sales figures from any first quarter ever reported for the global motorcycle industry. However, only half of the top 10 brands reported sales growth, so sales are obviously being split between more different companies than was happening previously. Remember though, these figures are the number of bikes sold during the first quarter of 2025, not the profit made. Honda remains the undisputed leader with 4.9 million sales, up 5.2% on 2024, and their fastest growing market was Mongolia, where sales were up an unbelievable 7,500%. So I'm guessing that they just entered the market there. Bosnia was up 312% and Chile up 165.3%. So despite everything, Honda are still breaking new ground. Hero come in second with 1.36 million sales, down 2% on 2024. New growth for them was in Latin America, with 131.4% growth in Argentina, 112% in Colombia, and 68.4% in Peru. Yamaha were third with 1.15 million sales, 2% down on 2024, but they had strong growth of 87% in Nicaragua, 83% in Moldova, and 82% in Albania. I think it will come as a surprise to many that it's actually the TVS Motor Company from India who came home in fourth, with 962,262 sales, up 9.4% on 2024 figures. They overtook the Idea to claim fourth place, and Vietnam, Argentina and Peru were their biggest growth markets. In fifth, despite the lack of sales of electric bikes in Western markets, Idea from China had sales of 781,543 units. That was down 5.7% on 2024. The EV specialist is struggling in its domestic market, but its foreign operations did grow by 54% despite the drop in European sales. Bajaj were sixth with 729,258 sales, 1.9% down on 2024. Their fastest growing markets were Indonesia up 367%, Brazil up 250%, and Poland up 200%. Suzuki had a bad year in 2024, but came in seventh with sales up 2.7% at 507,510. Royal Enfield in eighth had sales of 273,000, 22.8% up on 2024, making them the fastest growing brand of the top 25. Haichu from China sat in ninth with 262,821 sales, down 4% on 2024, and it was Italica from Mexico finishing off the top 10 with 254,113 sales, up 2.9% on 2024. The market I know best, of course, is the UK. Here the market had declined from 2022 to 2023, but only by 2.5%, from 116,500 sales in 2022 to 113,500 sales in 2023. This was mainly blamed on the cost of living crisis and high interest rates. results had looked much worse, but in December the market saw a massive 114% surge in registrations compared to December 2023. This anomaly was caused by the manufacturers pushing dealers to pre-register non-Euro 5 Plus compliant stock before the sales deadline. This late surge pushed the full 2024 year's registrations up to 116,399, a 2.5% increase over 2023 figures, and almost up to the 2022 sales figures. Overall sales were up 0.1% in 2023, and this seems to indicate the decline has been stopped, but it couldn't yet be called a recovery. Several major groups, including Completely Motoring, Thunder Road Motorcycles, Pidcocks and Marsh Holdings, all went into administration in late 2024. The reasons given including rising interest rates, reduced consumer spending, the seasonal nature of the business, and low profit margins on the increasingly popular small capacity bikes. This is not what the manufacturers want, but there is a genuine shift towards the smaller engine, cheaper bikes in the UK market. In the first half of 2024, the list of the top 10 bikes over 125cc contained 5 sub-500cc single-cylinder machines, and that's a significant increase from 2 in the 2023 top 10. Affordability is the driving force here, with lower running costs being the biggest driver. Company reports show that they see aging riders are getting disillusioned with heavy, overly powerful and expensive motorcycles and are moving to smaller capacity bikes. Segment by segment performance was interesting too. Adventure bikes were once again the most popular category in the UK. Sales were up 11% on 2023's figures, but it was surprisingly the sports bike sector that showed the best growth, with a strong comeback after years of decline. Sales were up 16.7% on 2023's figures, but that growth was driven by an upturn in sales of smaller capacity sports bikes. It was bikes like the Suzuki GSX-R 125 and the GSX-8R that were the ones driving the new sales, not the litre class superbikes that used to rule the market. Sales on naked bikes were down 11%, pushing them down below adventure bikes in the popularity stakes. Modern classics saw growth slowing too. The best sellers here again are now small single-cylinder motorcycles like the Triumph Speed 400 and the Royal Enfield Meteor 350. Electric motorcycles suffered a nightmare year in 2023 with a 38% drop in sales. They showed a small recovery in early 2024 with 10% growth, but with sales figures of just 1,188 units between January and April, they still generated less than half of the sales they did during the same period in 2022. Here, the decline is blamed on reduced government incentives and competition from the largely unregulated e-bicycle market. Model by model, the best-selling bikes on the UK market in 2023 were as follows. First, selling 4,013 units was the Yamaha NMAX 125 scooter. Second, selling 3,209 units was the Honda PCX 125. Third, selling 1,771 units was the Honda CBF 125. However, first of the big bikes came in fourth. Sort of. You see, in fourth was the BMW R1250 GS Adventure, selling 1,697 units. But then in fifth we have the BMW R1250 GS, which sold 1,153 units. That means, if counting them together, that would mean 2,850 units sold, which would have put them in third, but technically here I have to count them separately. Next in sixth place was the Honda NSC 110, selling 1,103 units, while in seventh the Honda CB750 Hornet sold 1,017 units. In eighth comes the Royal Enfield Hunter 350, selling 946 units, and Triumph managed ninth on the Street Triple RS, selling 912 units. The top 10 was finished off with the Benelli BN125, selling 881 units. So of the top 10, only 4 were above 500cc capacity. For 2024, I have to rely on figures for the first half of the year for now, and here I'll concentrate on the bikes above 125cc. The BMW R1250 GS Adventure came in first, selling 1,324 units. Second was the Triumph Speed 400 with 1,135 units. Third, the BMW R1300 GS sold 1,000 units. And fourth, the Triumph Scrambler 400X sold 900 units. Below that, we have the Triumph Tiger 900 GT Pro selling 549 units in fifth, the Yamaha MT-07 selling 485 units in sixth, the Royal Enfield Meteor 350 selling 452 units in seventh, the Triumph Street Triple RS selling 428 units in eighth, the Honda ADV 350 selling 426 units in ninth, and the Royal Enfield Himalayan 452 selling 365 units in 10th. This shows a big swing towards the smaller capacity bikes compared to previous years, and that's exaggerated by the newer crop of sub 500cc motorcycles now on the market. For 2025, the old guard seem to be concentrating on new financial offers to try and stimulate the market. BMW are offering 2.9% APR finance on the outgoing R1250 GS Adventure. Suzuki and Triumph are offering 4.9% APR deals on many models, and Kawasaki are offering deposit contributions and vouchers up to £3,000 to clear the stock they pre-registered. All of the manufacturers are offering deals of some sort, with discounts everywhere. Ducati have got most creative. They are rolling out what they call an accelerate deal, where customers pay 50% up front and have no payments for 2 years, with the option to pay the balance, return the bike or trade up after the 2 years have run out. So, sadly, we still see the big manufacturers paying more attention to finance deals than producing the motorcycles people really want. Is it any wonder we are losing so many dealers when all they have become is financial enablers and not motorcycle aficionados with a knowledge and passion for bikes? QJ Motors, the Kiwi Group and Lonsin are leaning heavily on UK importers MotoGP for this year, and as I started to talk about in the Chinese MV Agusta and New Adventure Bikes videos, it is becoming a crowded and competitive marketplace now. We have had a distorted view for many years now when it comes to the motorcycle industry. Giants like TVS and Haochu are all but unheard of in the Western world, but they are huge on the world stage when it comes to the numbers. Sales in China, India, Mexico and South America and Africa and the Indonesian market are massive compared even to the USA and Europe combined, and it is those markets that will now drive the industry much more than the Western markets do. Hero, Haochu, TVS, Lonsin, QJ Motors, Bajaj, Kiwi and Zhongshan are just some of the big companies that will be fighting the more recognised brands for a place in the top 10 best-selling motorcycle manufacturers. Many have also entered partnerships with the big players, giving them access to new tech while giving the likes of Triumph, KTM, BMW and others a way to bring new models to market faster and cheaper. Some of these companies don't enter the cumulative charts I showed at the beginning yet, simply because they are newer companies, but mark my words, it won't be long before some of them become much more recognised on the world stage. Looking at future trends, there is without doubt a significant shift happening in the global motorcycle industry. While Honda is unlikely to be ousted from its top position in overall sales volume, its dominance is being increasingly challenged by several of the fast-growing Indian manufacturers, including their old partner Hero. Honda's sheer scale and proven ability to grow make it a certainty to be the biggest brand by volume, certainly in 2026 and 2027. However, the data clearly shows that the global market is now dominated by Indian companies. Hero and TVS are best positioned to capitalise on this trend and will be hugely influential. Royal Enfield will also continue their steady march into Western markets. They have the advantage of being a few years ahead of the rest when it comes to setting up dealer networks, spares supply and servicing. Enfield is driving the growing trend for modern classics and small capacity motorcycles in developed markets too, and its growing influence will make it a much larger player in the future, just as it was in the past. TVS and Hero will become even more dominant players. Their influence is growing not only because of their massive sales volumes, but also their strategic partnerships. They are also clearly focused on the world's largest growth markets, and Bajaj have made a big statement with the effective purchase of KTM. We also have Mahindra. Their purchase and investment in resurrecting the BSA brand is another big statement. And remember, just as there was in the Japanese market in the 70s, there is a lot of internal rivalry going on here. One thing's for sure, it has to be good for the industry. These brands are fundamentally shifting the industry's centre of gravity towards India. If you look at the historic figures, you can see how much of an effect the Indian market has always had on global sales. The past partnership between Honda and Hero in '84 helped Honda top the table in world sales, and since its dissolution in 2010 has seen Hero steadily rise in the ranks. Hero could be set to make an even bigger impact now as they finally begin to expand into other more lucrative Western markets where the margins aren't so tight. Bajaj, Piaggio and Kawasaki all benefited from their partnerships in the 60s and 80s and all succeeded in increasing sales at the time. To name a few that are happening now, Hero have a partnership with Harley-Davidson, TVS with BMW and Bajaj with KTM, and they are all looking for solutions outside of China, and the Indian brands are ready and waiting. What it will mean is that as well as the new 450 GS from BMW, we will be getting at least one if not two Norton versions of that same 450, built in the same factory by the same people. It means we could have some exciting times ahead, with rivalries matching those between the big four Japanese manufacturers in the pre-2000 era. Those rivalries led to some amazing innovations and real progress across the industry, and I hope something similar will happen over the next few years. Suzuki are still clinging on to their top 10 spot, but they are now focusing much more on the sales of smaller capacity bikes in the Asian subcontinent. On the number of sales alone, Kawasaki have been well and truly pushed out of the top 10 now, and although profit is still better than many, they are becoming a much smaller player when it comes to the global market. Then, of course, we have the wave of huge motorcycle brands like Keeway Group, Longsin and QJ Motors expanding globally from China. They will challenge for places within the top 10 soon. There are also many niche market brands who influence the market in a different way. Kove, AJP, Sherco, Beta, Riehu and SWM will never reach the top 10, but all of them continue to carve their way into the market within their niche, and their successes will drive changes within the ranges of the bigger motorcycle manufacturers. Personally, I think Hero are the company set to make the biggest waves in the near future. Their experience at the Dakar and the racing experience and technical expertise of Speedbrain mean they are in the privileged position to have real world-beating motorcycle designs to integrate into their range, and a full team of factory riders that can test those machines far beyond any riding that any of us are likely to do. I will be looking at Hero and the new bikes they have on the horizon in a dedicated video soon, so keep your eyes peeled. Who do you think will be the big winners and losers in the next few years? As always, I look forward to hearing your comments below, and you know I reply when I can. Try and remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and sharing the video anywhere you think people will be interested helps us a lot too. If you'd like to help us to stay truly independent, on the Ko-fi link in the description you get access to a private group where I share videos I can't screen on YouTube. There are videos anyone can watch there, but you can make a one-off donation or join our group of monthly subscribers for access to other videos that only the channel's patrons can see. Join us on Rumble too. There is some great content there that I just can't share on YouTube. And don't forget, we make the best biker t-shirts. Hundreds of original designs on premium quality t-shirts and neck gaiters, all available worldwide. Links to the main website and the Redbubble shop are in the description. Have a great week, and always remember, keep your spanners close and your keys even closer. Ride free, everyone!